Yes, yes, it seems like the last thing to focus on, and yet it's when it's most important. So what you've just said there about the example of schools brings me to a question I was pondering, which is how do you see that our own personal spiritual practice might in some way impact, influence, benefit the collective?
Hmm. But I think that's always the case that, I mean, let's take Glastonbury as a case in point. Now, we all know, Glastonbury has extraordinary landscape and extraordinary myths and legends. And it once had a huge abbey where people prayed all the time from, very early times through to the Reformation. And then this enormous abbey was completely destroyed. And so a lot of other spiritual practices are going on at Glastonbury, but there's not a lot of stability in it.
Hmm.
So it's just like it's a spiritual place that where the prayer has not been continuous there, and continuous prayer sort of makes things stable. And so you get to the bottom of Glastonbury High Street and you see it happening to people. They just completely go off the rails, or behave aberrantly. And it's like everything sort of slushes to the bottom of the high street. And
Mm.
there's not that sort of there's not that sort of powerful prayer that's a continuous ongoingness. And I think that when you live near to something like that, that you're aware of that, both the need for that stability and the instability that's all around you. Just taking that as a random, because I mean, Glastonbury is considered to be this holiest earth, in ancient legend. And at one level it is, and at another level it's kind of disorderly because there's not a lot of coordination um, in spiritual effort then. I think spiritual belonging brings with it, in the same way that, um, that I think of sort of the legends of the Grail, where, knights go on quest for the Grail, which is sort of to restore things as they were, to bring back the waters. We were talking earlier on about, our current drought.
Mhm.
um, when the waters dry up, whether it's physically or in our soul, people need to go on quest. And they do a lot of wandering about and meeting odd and strange things and having all sorts of encounters. And they occasionally come across, in a clearing, there'll be a hermit who says, "That dream that you just had, I can tell you all about the dream you've just had, explain it to you." Um, so it's like everywhere, even in the sort of the most sort of spiritually redundant places, if I can, call them that, that if there is someone who is holding integrity and they're like a little beacon in that area that is having effect upon, the land can remember what it is, and the people around them can remember who they are. And there is an opening and an enlightenment, in the sense of, it's not all dark and dreadful
Mm.
that's going on. So I think, yes, that these things are important, but I'm just thinking also about, this very, subtle this world, other world thing, which I think is another problem here. I was talking this week to, a chaplain from the US, and he was telling me a story about, meeting up with some trainee chaplains, and he was teaching them and, talking about the various things that chaplains need to do. And then someone put up their hand and said, um, "You're talking about this as if it's all real," meaning the spiritual world. And I sort of said at that point, it might be, it would be like, maybe you have chosen the wrong profession. Um, but I think that I don't think this is all real going on, which stops people engaging with spiritual
Yes.
practice, which I think is and of course we're going back to the wound of not having your own tradition. If
Yes.
whatever your
Mhm.
tradition is, whether you're, one of the big 5 religions or, a bunch of people who go and worship a tree, which of course in Hinduism would be regarded that you would just be a Hindu. Yes, that's
Mm.
not considered to be a strange thing to do that. But whatever it is that you hold holy or, sacred, um, Um, and if you're not one of those, if you don't fit into one of those official boxes, um, then, what are you? You're not authorized is what people very often think, I'm not authorized. And I hear these words so often, um, but I don't know how to do that properly.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
properly means, no one showed me how to do this. But,
Mm.
and often you find people who've discovered their own spiritual way, they're doing their own spiritual practice, and at the same time, they will diss it. They will say,
Mm.
"I'm not really authorized to do this," whereas in fact, you know, the world has shown you this, and it's
Yeah, or
do
your
it.
own soul, or
Yeah,
yes, one way or another. We are called
exactly.
back over and over. So there's, gosh, there's about 5 different,
I know.
places I want to go from
Under a lot
here.
of
So,
windows, yeah.
um, so the first is a maybe a slight dichotomy in what I was hearing in what you were just sharing. This isn't saying you were contradicting yourself, but I think this is a kind of, part of the challenge that in the example you gave of Glastonbury, um, we've got all of these kind of, different practices and
Yeah,
beliefs, and it's kind of, it doesn't have that cohesion. And I was comparing it as I was listening you talk. At the moment, my shamanic teacher is a traditional Mongolian
yeah,
shaman, which comes from, many thousands of years, unbroken
yeah,
lineage. So it has that cohesion of
yes,
rituals and prayers and beliefs and cosmology. And as you were saying, that's no longer the case in what was once this kind of cohesive spiritual center
yes,
like Glastonbury. And yeah, you also gave the example of both that hermit, where one person with that kind of true spiritual practice, being in integrity, um, can be this light
yes,
in the dark. And then also, as you were saying at the end, someone finding their way. In fact, that's very much an aspect of my own story, kind of finding my way literally to a tree and recognizing
yes,
what was there that our culture hadn't told
yes,
me. Um, we can wake up to these things seemingly spontaneously as well, which is completely outside of a teaching and lineage,
yes.
as it seems to us at least. Um so what's your sense as to kind of what's the way for us, for those of us that aren't currently in a traditional lineage, but are feeling this call to a spiritual practice? What's your sense of navigating that? As you say, we look at somewhere like Glastonbury and you can feel there is this kind of, chaotic nature where things aren't coming from a cohesive place, from a lineage. And yet on the other hand, for many of us, that's kind of like the best
Mm,
we've got, it's a
yeah.
starting point. But I'd love to hear your sense.
Well, just to go back briefly to Glastonbury, I should have sort of also said at the same time that, that places that have very strong energy and need sort of a bit of spiritual, guardianship going on there in terms of that cohesion, that things come to sacred
Hmm.
places that have, been slightly off piste because they're not fulfilling what they used to do, whether it was druids who were there before or whatever you want to call them. Um, but there's something that when something's kind of slightly off true, it begins to warp things. And so very often I think of
Mm.
very sacred
Because of the
places.
power of that
It's
place.
so powerful that it
Yeah.
acts like a
Mm.
burning glass, and
Yeah.
so I've seen it very many times that, people come with, "Oh, we're moving to Glastonbury," and my heart sinks because I know that there are family problems or that, one of
Mm.
the children is, slightly on the spectrum or whatever it is, and I'm gonna think, "Well, how is that going to play out?" Because
'Cause
it
it'll be
tends to
amplified.
accentuate,
Mm.
so very happy people become maniacally happy, slightly depressed people become very depressed, and so that that sort of intensification of things. I mean, I dare say it would be the same if we went to several other places that were a
Mm.
little bit chaotic in that respect. But, the every it's the I think it's the everydayness of every day that we need to work with, and, um, that's not difficult material. In fact, it's spurned because it's very ordinary.
Mhm.
But I'm sort of thinking back to, currently on Substack, I'm sort of writing a course called the Golden Verses course, which is based upon the teachings of Pythagoras as an everyday the Pythagorean sort of lifestyle and how to keep in harmony with the universe. Now, that's been going on for 25 centuries, which is quite a long time. And one of the practices that they did was the salutations of the sun, which was like you got up in the morning, you saluted the sun. You see it in the symposium. Um, Plato is in the porch and he's thinking in the porch all night, and people think, is he still there? And it's like, and then the sun comes up and he venerates the sun. So it's a very common practice in the Greek world. Um, so you do it at sort of, the beginning of the day when you get up. Um, and again, when you stop at midday, you salute the sun again at midday. You do it when you come home because the sun is going to the west, you're going back to your home unless you're on night shift. And then when we go to sleep, when we lie down before we start going to sleep, we do it again. So the sun for us in our hemisphere is at rest when it's night. So just even those 4 places of just touching into whatever's sacred to you is a really good thing. So we've got that daily round,
Mm.
we've got the monthly round of the moon, if you're more into moon things. And then we've got the yearly cycle of the sun, which of course gives us all our seasons and all those things. So we've got these 3 very natural cycles already going on, which we are living out. Um, so calibrating those within religious calendars has always been a very great challenge because the year doesn't come round in a tidy, exactly 365 point whatever it is
Mm.
days, and we have to have these extra days to make things up. But so I think that's a good place to start. And I think another
Mm.
good place to start is where we're living. You get
Mhm.
up in the morning and it's like, where is the wind blowing from this morning? This is this. I know people will see this as this strange British preoccupation with weather. Actually, actually when you're on an island, where the weather comes from is very much about how we are today. When we
Mm.
talk about the weather, we're saying how we are. Um,
Mhm.
you know, so that sort of that daily noticing of, what the weather is, how am I today? I'm feeling pretty grumpy, whatever it is. Um, but now I'm going to sort of come into sort of, one place with where I'm living. So it's a nice way of sorting those things out. But this is a very elderly metaphor, so I have to apologize to those that weren't living in these times. But analog television used to have horizontal and vertical hold, meaning if the television wasn't and if the screen went round like this, you'd have to adjust the which of the holds would, and there was if it was going zzz from side to side, you would adjust the button, and you adjusted the horizontal and vertical hold. And I think for me, those are also it's an important metaphor. It creates this, which is
Mm.
the land we're on, the ancestors I come from. So and that works wherever you are in the world. So if your family have emigrated to Australia or you're currently living in Burma as part of an embassy or whatever you're doing, um, or you're traveling, you can always do that. You're always in touch with your ancestral traditions and still with the land that you're on where you are. And
Mm.
I think those are 2 very nice ways of starting a spiritual practice.